This week, the work you're going to be doing is all about food security. So before you begin your work, it's important for you to actually know what food security is all about and some of the things that affect food security. Okay, that's a definition of food security. And basically, food security is all about making sure that there's enough food for everyone to eat. Now, the good news is in Australia at the moment, we can produce plenty of food for everyone in Australia to eat. So at the moment in Australia, we certainly don't have an issue with food security. But there are some parts of the world where that's not the case. And one of the activities you'll be doing this week is having a look at a world map and finding out about some areas of the world where food security is a concern. And obviously in Australia as well, we have to keep in mind that whilst food security at the moment is good, we do need to look after our environment to make sure that in the future we continue to have good food security. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to have a look at are some of the things that can affect food security. So an example that's particularly relevant to Australia is droughts. Okay, so when we have periods of drought, that reduces the amount of food that we can produce in Australia. Now, obviously in Australia we can buy food from overseas as well, but if we have an extended period of drought, that affects the amount of food that we can produce in Australia. Another factor that's really important in Australia is salinity. Okay, salinity, that's where the soil can become really salty. So salt that's from underneath the ground rises up to the surface and makes the salt really salty. And when the soil is very salty, that means that a lot of crops can't grow on that land. So we actually have large areas of land in Australia where it's not possible to grow crops because the soil has too much salt in it. Another issue that can affect food security that's not relevant to Australia, but it's certainly relevant to other parts of the world, is where you have war. So in parts of the world where there are wars, it makes it very difficult for people to produce food. And a really big factor that will contribute to food security in the future is climate change. So as a result of the climate changing, there are parts of the world that used to be really valuable for food production, where it's now becoming increasingly difficult to grow food. Now, you might be listening to all of this and thinking it's quite doom and gloom, and what can we do about it? The good news is that science can play a really important role in making sure that we continue to have enough food for everyone to eat. And you're going to be doing some reading and watching some videos about that this week. Okay? Some examples of the ways that scientific research will continue to ensure that we have good food security is that scientific research might help us to find some solutions to some of the problems that affect food production. So on the previous couple of slides, we looked at some of those issues that affect food production, and we saw that drought and salinity were two of those issues. Now, some of the videos that you're going to be able to watch this week deal with some of those issues and look at some scientific research that's being carried out to make sure that we continue to have enough water to grow crops, and also what we can do about soil salinity as well. So we might actually be able to fix some of those problems, but it's going to require some research. Now, the other thing that scientific research can do is that it can help us to design crops that can grow in less than ideal conditions. So a good example of that is that by tweaking with the DNA of plants, scientists have been able to design some plants that can cope with high salt levels. So that's really good news, because it means that in the future, it might be possible to grow crops on soil that is normally too salty for us to grow crops. Okay, so there's a lot of scientific research that's currently happening to try and design plants that are going to be able to grow in conditions that are less than ideal. The other thing that science can do as well is that through experiments, we can test out different agricultural practices to find out the best way to grow plants. So rather than just using trial and error, we can carry out proper scientific investigations and find out the best way to grow crops so that we get the best yields without damaging the environment too much. So even if we're able to address those issues that affect food production, we need to keep in mind that the world population is growing. So as the population continues to increase, we're going to need more and more food to feed all the people that are on Earth. Again, science is likely to play an important role in coming up with some ideas for making sure that there's enough food for everyone to eat. There's a few different ways that we can make sure there's enough food for everyone to eat. Obviously, one thing we definitely need to look at is reducing the amount of food that we waste. Okay, so there's a lot of food that goes in the bin, and we could be doing other things with that food. So that's one role that science might be able to play, is to find ways of using food waste so that we are wasting less food. Now, the other thing we probably will need to do in the future is to find alternative sources of nutrients. So on this slide here, you can see a plate of insects. Okay, insects have got lots of protein, just like meat. So that's certainly an alternative source of protein that we may need to consider in the future. And science can play a part in helping us work out which food sources are safe to eat and which ones will be the most nutritious as well. But also we might need to look at producing food in different ways. So the other picture that I've got on that slide there, that's meat that's been made in a petri dish. Okay, so instead of meat that's been obtained from an animal, it's meat that's been artificially grown in a lab. So that's another area of research, coming up with different ways of making food. So rather than making meat by growing animals, we might be able to make meat in a lab without the need to grow animals or kill animals. Okay, so there's lots of different ways that food might be able to be produced in the future. Okay, hopefully that's got you thinking about the role that science will play in addressing food security. Okay, so now that you've watched this video, you can have a go at doing some of the activities that have been set for you this week.